Hello, everyone. Hello, my Facebook and YouTube buddies. I'm so glad I'm here. I couldn't figure out how to do Instagram. I'm sorry. I'm still technically challenged. So I'm all here by my lonesome. And so let me know you're here because absolutely nobody's in my house or office except for my little dog and me. And so talking to myself feels even weirder than usual. So I usually have someone here on with me, and that's not happening today. So would love to see who's here and how we can help you understand the difference between a personal problem and a marital problem. Thank you, Martha, for letting me know we are live. Thank you, Roberta. I'm so glad you're here. Who else is here? Who else is here? Say hi. We are getting all geared up for our webinar on Thursday. So I've been busy preparing so I can really give you great value that day. I hope you've signed up for it. So today we're going to be talking about what the difference between a personal problem and a marriage problem. So what do you think? What's the difference? And is there a difference? Is there a difference between a personal problem and a marriage problem? Because I think they go together in some ways. Like personal problems can cause marriage problems, and marriage problems can cause personal problems, right? So what would be the difference? Hello, everyone. Hi, so good to see you. What's the difference if you can think about the difference between a personal problem and a marriage problem? And do they always intersect, or maybe not? Like say you have a personal problem in that you're a slob. You have a personal problem, you're a slob. And maybe that's not a problem for you, but it becomes a problem for your spouse, right? Or maybe you have a personal problem in that you don't know how to handle your emotions. And so you just shut down and turn everything off, or everything comes through the anger channel. And you don't know how to manage your emotions. And so you either just become flatlined and numb, or you're just letting it all out in inappropriate ways. Do you think that personal problem could cause a marriage problem? Yeah. But it's really not, the origin of it isn't the marriage problem. And this is where marriage counseling can get a little dicey, because the origin is more of a personal problem. Or if you're an addict, let's say you're drinking too much alcohol, or you're taking drugs. I mean, that's a personal problem, but it affects the marriage, right? But when you go to marriage counseling and you talk about addiction, that's really not a marriage problem. That's a personal problem, but it impacts the marriage in that I can't trust you, or I don't feel safe with you when you're drinking and driving, and I don't know how to communicate that to you. So let's kind of talk together. Let's have a conversation. Character issues. So I just saw something here. Somebody said something here. Let me find it here. Character issues like drinking, verbally abuse are not marriage problems. You're right. Personal problems can cause marriage problems. You're right. And I think sometimes marriage problems can cause personal problems, right? So let's say you're having a marriage problem. Let's say you come from two different cultures. Maybe one very outgoing and gregarious, and everybody's very friendly and fun-loving and loving and huggy. No problem there. It's just how that family is. And maybe another person comes from a very quiet, sort of like my big fat Greek wedding. If you ever saw that wedding, very quiet, straight-laced, maybe English bred, doesn't show a lot of emotions, very stoic. And this couple gets married, and it's not any personal problems, just differences. They're different, and they express things differently. Can you imagine how that might cause some marriage problems if they're not understanding that they're different, but one's right and one's wrong, or one's good and one's bad, instead of we're just different? And how do we learn to understand each other's love language? And how do we understand how to fight and communicate in our language? How do we develop in our language together versus my family of origin was better than your family of origin on the way we dealt with things? Maybe not. So this is where there was no personal problems and no family problems. Not no family problems. Of course, every family has problems, but you know what I'm saying? That just sometimes differences in the way a couple sees things, or priorities or values, can cause marriage problems. There was no personal problem per se, but it causes a marriage problem. Think of another one. Sometimes it's just their problem and you are the bystander, Heather says. Exactly. So a personal problem would be what we've just talked about. A marriage problem might be that there are differences and you don't know how to negotiate those. There are real differences in personalities. One's an extrovert, one's an introvert. It's not a personal problem, it's just a difference. One is a saver, one's a spender, one's an ambitious go-getter. The other one likes to relax and, keep things easy. And again, these are not personal problems or sin issues. Hold on. My phone is ringing. Let me just turn it off. It's not a personal sin issue at all. It's just a difference of personality, a difference of temperament, or even a difference of values. Like maybe one person really values saving for retirement and saving every penny. And another person really says, you know what? I want to live my life and I want to buy Christmas presents for the kids and I want to go on vacation and I don't want to be saving everything. I'll save something. And so it causes some marriage strife and some marriage problems. But when we're talking about a destructive relationship, which is what we talk about a lot on this site, this is my public site, so be careful of what you post. But when we talk about destructive marriage problems, those are always a result of personal problems. Not only are they the result of a personal problem, but they also cause personal problems, okay? So problems in your marriage, so it's sort of like a circle. So if your husband has issues with handling his emotions, for example, or he's totally irresponsible financially, all right, that causes marriage problems for you for sure. But then it also causes personal problems for you because maybe his temper, he says ugly things to you and now it starts to erode at your self-esteem, or you start to get depressed and now you're struggling with personal problems. One of the reasons I started this ministry to women in destructive marriages, I don't know if I've ever told you the history of this. I mean, I've always been interested in abuse, even when I graduated from my master's degree in college, way back a long time ago. My very first job was working at a hospital, teaching doctors and nurses to recognize child abuse because the laws had just been changed. So I've been working with abuse issues my whole life. But where I really became interested in not just children, but Christian women who were in destructive marriages was when I was writing my book on depression. And as I was counseling and speaking about this and talking to hundreds and hundreds of women all over the country about depression and women, of course, back then when I wrote the book, it was still not cool to take medication. You weren't having enough faith. You weren't a strong enough Christian, all of those kind of things. But what I really began to understand is that 99% of the women who were clinically depressed in my practice and those that I interviewed were clinically depressed because they were in destructive marriages. And so here's this marriage problem that was caused by a personal problem of their husband, addiction, deceit, adultery, whatever it is, verbal abuse, doesn't know how to handle his emotions. And so he's abusing her and she's developing a personal problem. And I did a talk once on depression as is a response to interpersonal distress. When you're in a relationship with someone who's constantly beating you up, you're going to do one of two things. You're going to blow up and start getting ugly back, and now you're just as ugly as they are, or you're going to shut down and start to feel like a nothing, like a loser. And so this depression causes a personal problem for you. And then this personal problem can cause more marriage problems. And so it becomes a really vicious cycle. And that's where it can get all muddy and confusing, even when you go in for counseling. It's hard to label or name. Was the chicken the egg? Was the egg the chicken? What came first? And that's why we don't recommend, if you're in a destructive marriage, we don't recommend marriage counseling as your first solution. And we'll talk a lot about that tomorrow. Not tomorrow. Tomorrow's Wednesday. Thursday, we are doing a workshop. I worked so hard on it today. I almost thought it was tomorrow. But Thursday at noon Eastern time and at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time, I am going to be doing a workshop that's going to be totally online, not on Facebook, so you can be in a private chat, but you have to sign up to attend. And the topic of the workshop is how long? How long do you keep trying? You know, God says marriage is sacred, and it is. I've been married for 46 years this year to the same person, which is a feat these days, and it hasn't been wonderful every 46 years or every day of the 46 years. Sometimes it's tough. We have differences. We have disagreements. We don't see eye to eye on a lot of things. We don't always have the same interests. But those aren't reasons to get divorced. Those are reasons to grow and work together and work hard at trying to make this marriage work as God wants you to. But there are times when the marriage is not just hard. It's not just disappointing. It's destructive. And when that happens, what is God's answer for you? Is it to stay on a lifetime of antidepressants? Is it that you're supposed to keep trying harder, which only enables his selfishness to continue? What is God's solution for you when you're in a destructive marriage? So if that's a question that's burning on your heart for you or someone you know, maybe it's your daughter, maybe it's your pastor's wife, maybe it's your best friend and you know she's struggling, I would highly encourage you to share this link or sign up for yourself and come to the webinar. It's workshop. It's free. It's Thursday at noon Eastern time or 7:30. I'll be doing both of them live. And afterwards, we will have a Q&A time where you can really ask me your more personal questions that you wouldn't ask me on a Facebook Live, because you wouldn't want your husband or your mother-in-law to stumble on this page and see your name and a question that you asked. So let me just read the comments that you're writing on the difference between a personal problem and a marriage problem. Yeah, what percentage? 1 in 4 Christian, I don't know what you mean by what percentage, but 1 in 4 Christian women have reported being in emotionally destructive marriage. 1 in 4, right? So if you're in a church of 100, 25 women are in a destructive marriage. If you're in a church of 1,000, 250 women are in a destructive marriage. That's a lot of women. It might have been what percentage were depressed clinically and were also in a destructive marriage. I would say from my experience, 95 to 99% of the women who were clinically depressed in my practice when I was working on my book on depression were also in an emotionally destructive marriage. And that led to their depression because they were so beaten down and they were so disempowered. You see, depression is almost a disempowering of yourself. Like you lose yourself, you numb out in order to cope. In fact, the National Institute of Mental Health says the highest rates of clinical depression are among unhappily married women. Why? Especially for Christian women, because we do value the sanctity of marriage, because we do want to try to fix our marriage. But when the marriage is making you sick and suicidal, did you know, I just read the statistic, and I don't know if I'll be quoting it exactly. I'll try to get it right for the webinar. And I'm trying to think of who reported this, but 25% of suicides among Caucasian women are because they're in a domestic violence situation. And 50% of suicides from African-American women are because they're in a domestic violence situation. I mean, when I was in the Philippines, before I ever even started working on domestic abuse specifically, I was teaching there, and one of the missionaries came up to me, and her husband was a church planter, and she was depressed, and she was going to commit suicide because she said, that's more honorable than getting divorced. It's more honorable to not expose my husband. That's not clear thinking. So her marriage was causing a personal problem. So this topic is, how do we differentiate between personal problems and marriage problems? And it's not so easy. And that's where sometimes the counseling process can get confusing, because if you've got a personal problem, you need to address that first. But if the marriage is causing your problems, so if you're here because you want to know our Thursday webinar, how long should I keep trying? But meanwhile, you're struggling with depression, you're struggling with bitterness, you're struggling with low self-esteem, you're struggling with hopelessness, you're struggling with despair, you're struggling with flying off the handle at your kids, and you're not all the person that you thought you were or that you want to be anymore, then your marriage problems, what's happening in your marriage, is now causing personal problems, right? It's sort of like, I'm trying to think of examples that in real life, like secondhand smoke isn't your problem. It may be someone else's problem that they're a smoker. But if they're smoking around you and causing you to have emphysema or lung problems, now it's your problem. And it's a personal problem. It's also a relationship problem because they didn't care about how it affected you, right? But it's now a personal problem. And are you, as a Christian woman, and this is really critical, are you, as a Christian woman, allowed to steward your well-being? Are you allowed to do that? If it means stepping back from your marriage. You see, the church has not honored that as a solution. Oh, just keep taking antidepressants, but not, oh, you can't separate in order to get healthy because you need to stay married because that's what God wants. But does God want you to sacrifice your own health? It'd be one thing to sacrifice your health to take care of someone who was getting healthy too. But if they're not getting healthy and they're not working on themselves and they keep abusing you, is that an honorable sacrifice to actually enable someone to stay healthy as it makes you sicker and sicker, stay sick or destructive in order for you to, and you keep getting sicker and sicker. I didn't say that really well. I'm going to say it again. Is it an honorable sacrifice for you to allow yourself, for you not to steward your own well-being, your own mental health, your own emotional health, your own financial health, your own sexual health, just to stay married and be a sacrificial lamb only to enable someone else to be more selfish and sinful? It's not like you're sacrificing. When Jesus died on the cross, he wasn't sacrificing to allow the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the soldiers to abuse him. He was sacrificing to save us from our sin, if for a higher noble cause. If you die giving a kidney to your brother because he needs a kidney, well, maybe that's a noble sacrifice. If you die jumping into an icy pond to save a child from drowning and you end up drowning too, or end up drowning instead, that may be a noble sacrifice. But for you to sacrifice yourself in order to allow a bully to bully more, to bully others, to stay sinful, is that a noble sacrifice? And so this is where we need to really think through this biblically, because I don't think so. And I'm going to talk all about that at our workshop on Thursday. So let me look at some of the comments. Yeah, so Jency says, hubby has bipolar disorder, which caused my depression. I would highly encourage you to go to, I send out a newsletter every week. And today my newsletter came out and it said, for better or for worse, if my husband's sick, do I still have to stay with him? And we talked about mental health issues in that newsletter. So you certainly, maybe one of my staff can post the newsletter in the feed so that they can get a copy of it if they're not on our newsletter mailing list. Because this is really important. Is God asking you to sacrifice your health in order to stay with someone who isn't taking care of their health? They're bipolar, but they won't get help. They won't go for help, and yet it's taking its toll on you. Is God asking you to sacrifice your health because they won't take care of their health? Maybe not. Maybe not. Yeah, Nicole says that is oppression, a threat, coercion to force her, totally controlling. That's emotional abusive. That's the truth. And so this is really important that we understand what's really going on. And I don't think we have seen the problem clearly. And what I want to teach you on Thursday is, I think it's great to try hard in your marriage. I've been a marriage counselor for over 40 years. I would encourage you at your first level of trying is to try hard. Try hard to speak the truth. Try hard to show love. Try hard to be the bigger person. Try hard to be a great example. All those kind of things. And I'm not saying give those things up. You do want to be a good example, because even if your husband doesn't care, guess who's watching? Your kids are watching. But when you get so beaten down in a marriage that you're not being a good example anymore, you're crumbling in despair. You're staying in bed all day. You're drinking too much wine. You're taking tons of medication just so you can get through a day. You're not being any kind of example to your children of what you need to do to steward your well-being and theirs from bully, from a toxic person. If your husband was smoking marijuana in the house all day, or drinking and bringing drinking buddies and people who were reckless in the house all day, I hope you wouldn't just say, I guess we just have to live like this. Maybe you wouldn't. He was bringing all of his drug addicted friends into the house, but yet he can bring in all of his foulness and all of his pornography and all of his toxicity. And we're called as Christian women just to persevere, to suffer well. Is God really asking us to be an enabler of sin? If you are his helpmate, if you are truly loving him as his helpmate, what would you do? Would you indulge and just forbear? Or would you have some boundaries and consequences? I mean, let's just think about this with our child. Let's say your child had a personal problem. Let's say they were addicted to drugs, and they were causing a family problem in that they were stealing money from you. And they were causing a relationship problem between you and your child. They were stealing money from you. They stole your jewelry. I've had a client who went through that he would steal her jewelry. She'd take off her wedding rings and put them in the bed jewelry, and he'd take it out and take it to the pawn shop so he could buy drugs. So his personal problem was now causing a relationship problem. What's the most loving thing to do? Well, it's sort of clear if you're the mom, you don't give him the rest of your jewelry. You don't keep giving him money so that he can indulge in his drug habit and be irresponsible and uncaring toward the effect and impact on you. But that's sort of what Christian wives are told to do. Just keep going along with destructive behavior in the hopes that he'll come to his senses by forgiving and forbearing. And I think God has a much more robust plan for you to be his helpmate, for you to truly love your husband well, for you to truly be his helpmate. Isn't to indulge sin. It's to speak the truth. It's to expose the unfruitful deeds of darkness. And we'll talk about that on Thursday. So Tamara said, I've worked on our marriage for 32 of 37 years with solely marriage counseling, never understanding until 5 years ago why I was beating my head against the wall, because the good advice wasn't able to be implemented. We now realize it was an individual problem, not a marriage problem for both of us. We've been separated going on 5 years, needing each of us to do our individual work. And at this point, my husband isn't willing and is enjoying his freedom. So sad. You're absolutely right, Tamara. And I'm so glad that you're doing your work, because you'll hear on Thursday that even if your husband doesn't want to do his work and your marriage can't be repaired, you have some work to do, because this marriage problem is causing you problems. All of us come into marriage. Let me just start by saying all of us come into marriage with a couple suitcases full of problems, personal problems. All right. It might be that, we're immature and we don't know how to resolve conflict. It might be we're a people pleaser and we're just too accommodating. It might be that we're scared to speak up for ourselves. It may be that we've never ever spoken up for ourselves because we've never even done the work to figure out who we are, because we went from high school to college to marriage, and we never really fully adulted before we got married. All right. So we all come into marriage with some personal issues, and marriage, is meant to mature you, just like having kids is meant to mature you, right? So when you have kids, you discover some personal problems like, oh my gosh, I lose my temper, I'm pretty selfish, and all those kind of personal issues that kids reveal once you have them, right? And you work through those as you learn to love and have a family and be in a relationship and all those kind of things, except when someone doesn't. When they don't want to grow, they don't want to learn, they don't want to change, they don't self-correct, they don't mature. How many of you are still married to a 14-year-old boy, right? Because he's refusing to mature, because maybe you've overfunctioned and cared for him, and his personal problems now have become marriage problems, because now you're broke and you're in tons of debt because he buys all the stuff he wants to buy, but he doesn't pay his bills. And you're stressed out and you're losing your house and you're in bankruptcy and all the different kinds of things, because he's never addressed his personal problem of being irresponsible and not being a good steward of money. And you've overcompensated for that. And you're exhausted and tired and resentful. And now that's become your personal problem. And there's all kinds of marriage issues that are never going to be resolved, because each of you have your personal issues that you haven't addressed or looked at and worked on, right? And so I want to just help clear that debris for you a little bit on our Thursday's workshop, because sometimes what happens, and I'm just going to be really honest with you guys, I think I'm about the only person who's really saying this. There's other people who are Christian, people who are dealing with people in abusive marriages, women, but I think I'm about the only person who's saying it. It's not just him. It's not just him who has to do work. If you leave this marriage, and you might have to, and I would support that if you need to, but your life isn't all better just because you leave a destructive person, because that impact has affected you. And you might be still in your own immature ways of being too accommodating or too people pleasing, or not sure of speaking up for yourself, or still don't even know your own self, because you went from marriage to mom to wife to people pleaser to accommodating, and you never figured it out. And so it's time for you to take a moment to clarify who you are, who God's made you to be, and to work on some of your own problems, whether you're overreactive and you're losing your cookies and making a mess of things because you're so angry and so bitter and so out of control and traumatized that you're not handling yourself any better than he is nowadays. And your kids are saying, Mom, you shouldn't be accusing Dad of being abusive. You're just as abusive. And you're not abusive in the same way. Maybe he's more controlling abuse and you're more reacting to his control and his covert stuff. But in front of the kids, it looks the same. In front of the court, it looks the same. And so it's time for you to say, whew, my personal problems I've gotten because I'm living in this toxic environment. And maybe I brought a few of my own. Maybe I was too nice. I was too accommodating. I was too much of a people pleaser. And now I've got a string of relationships that nobody cares about me, only if I do for them. Well, that's a personal problem that has led to relationship problems, right? So it's time for you to maybe do some work. So don't just think that I just have to get rid of this marriage and everything will be fine. Things could be better. Things could be worse. Divorce has its own issues to struggle through. And that's why it's so important that you recognize that whatever his problems were probably have led to some problems for you and problems for your marriage. And as long as you're one piece of this puzzle that says, I'm going to work on me, I'm going to take responsibility for me, I'm going to grow through this, I'm going to do my work so that I don't end up in the same spot 10 years from now. I don't want to be in the same spot 10 years ago. 10 years from now, I'm going to grow. Yeah. I left, but also working on myself to heal. And not just, there's a lot of healing because When you've been beaten with a hammer or you've been beaten with a toothpick, I mean, 1,000 toothpick pricks or 1,000 paper cuts can be pretty toxic over time, right? 1,000 bee stings. One bee sting you can deal with if you're not allergic, but 1,000 bee stings, 1,000 paper cuts, it's pretty disabling. It's pretty disabling. And this is where the church or marriage counselors often make a mistake. You go in and you start talking about more of the covert things, like he doesn't listen to me, he snickers when I falls asleep when I talk to him, he ignores me when I cry. And they're like, yeah, well, this is a normal part of marriage. Men are kind of like that. You just need to forgive him and let go of the bitterness. And it's like, wait a minute. Over and over again, if you really care about somebody, even when you do little things like that, you stop doing them if you see it hurt someone. I remember when my child was little, I think I've shared with many of you that I was raised by an abusive mom who was out of control and, very scary and physically violent, emotionally cruel. And, I could never understand that until I had my own kid. And then I could understand how that happened. I can understand how you get stressed out and you could say ugly things, or you could shake your kid in a moment of anger. And one time I did do something, harsh with my child. I yanked him up by his arm, and it was totally inappropriate. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I don't want to be like my mom. I don't want to be like that. So my personal problem was causing a parenting problem, right? But when I saw it, I stopped it. I got help for it. I didn't do it again. And that's the difference. But when you're caught in these repetitive patterns, or your husband's caught in these repetitive patterns, and there's no change, there's no owning it. It's your fault I did it. I could have blamed my kids. It's your fault I did that. You would have not been treated that way had you been listening to me, right? And there's a smidge of truth to that. But I'm still responsible for me. I'm still responsible for me. Yeah, so I'm going to take some questions from here. My husband is doing this. He's so in denial. He keeps saying we both need therapy. We both have issues. And he would never admit to his wrongdoing, that most of our issues are because of his abusive ways. Yeah, Wendy, and you said that before. And so that may be true. But what would happen if you just said, you know what? You're right. I'm going for help for me because I am not living like this anymore. Right? And you just took trying to fix him off of your back. That's not your responsibility. But as you said, I'm going to do what I need to do, get as healthy as possible. And as you're getting healthier and you can speak up in love, you can have boundaries without being furious at him at the same time, and you can learn to do those things. You're going to get wiser and stronger. And he's going to do one of two things. He's going to say, wow, I kind of want some of that too. How many of you have ever seen someone who's lost weight, or all of a sudden they're standing up straighter and they're just looking more confident and more beautiful, and you're saying, what'd you do? Like, who'd you see? Like, tell me, how'd you lose that weight? Or how did you get your haircut so cute? Or what makeup are you using? Or how did you get so confident, right? When we see someone become more beautiful, become more mature, usually we don't make fun of them. At least if we're healthy, we think, I'd like some of that too. How'd you do that? Right? So you could, as you do your work and get healthier, you could motivate your husband to say, wow, I like the new you better than the old you. I need to get some of my own help too. Or sometimes when you lose weight and you get more confident, and more people who are envious of you put you down, right? They want to squash that in you. They want to, who do you think you are? You just think you're looking so cute. You look like trash, and they just put you right back down because they're threatened by your growth. But then it'll be really clear for you which direction you need to go, right? Because there's no reconciliation with someone who treats you like that. There's no relationship with someone who treats you like that, even though you're married. And we're going to talk a lot about that in the webinar. What does marriage really mean to God? What does marriage really mean to God when he talks about marriage? How did he create marriage to be? And when it's not that way, what are we to do? Just like the church. I just did a conference about why the church keeps making the same mistakes with abuse cases, both in domestic violence as well as the sexual abuse stuff. And we're not functioning as the church should be. We're not functioning. We're protecting the oppressors, and we're covering for the oppressed, keeping their power intact, and we're discounting the people who are being abused. We're vilifying them. We're demonizing them. And so I said, this isn't the way God designed the church. We're not functioning well. So are we supposed to just go along with it and say, well, it's a church, we just need to submit? Or do we say, no, this isn't how it's supposed to be. This isn't how God created the church. And in the same way, this isn't how God created marriage. This is not how God created marriage, for you to be scared, for you to be oppressed, for you to be abused, for you to be lied to, cheated on. That is not God's picture of marriage. And it will cause you issues, mental health issues, as well as physical health issues when you live in that long term. Yeah. Sometimes personal counseling causes more issues if he's encouraged to be his authentic self. I am requiring counseling for abusive behavior and confession of the abuse before considering the possibility of reconciliation. If he chooses not to do that, I know it will continue to be a problem. And Claire, I would encourage you. I think he should be encouraged to be his authentic self, because if his authentic self, let me draw a picture for you. You know me and my pictures, and then we'll answer questions. Let me get my eraser here. What do I do with my eraser? Well, my eraser disappeared. All right, let me just erase this. Okay. So if his authentic self, we'll put it I would say AS, but we won't do that. Authentic self. Your authentic self, okay? Who is your authentic self? Who do you want to be? What values and virtues do you aspire to? That's how you find your authentic self. What would you live for? What would you die for? What's most important to you? It's not, my authentic self is, I like hot dogs, and that's not your authentic self. Your authentic self is your character. Who are you, or who do you aspire to? What would you like said at your funeral? That's your authentic self, okay? So if his authentic self is, I want to be mean and ugly, and I like hurting people, I like winning, I like being right, and I like being on top. If that's his authentic self, if you could read my writing, wouldn't it be best for you to know that? If that's really who he admires and he wants to be a bad, if that's who he wants to be and he's proud of that, wouldn't it be better for him to show you that and for him to just live full out so that you could run as fast as you could away from that than for him to pretend he's a Christian nice guy, a sheep in wolf's clothing? Wouldn't it be better for him to be his authentic self? And so this is one of the things I teach women in our groups. I say, don't try to tell your husband who he should be. If he wants to be a cheater and a liar and a porn addict, if he wants to be mean and ugly as a dad, that's who he's proud of at the end of the day. When he puts his head on the pillow, if that's the kind of man he wants to be, you need to know that, because you won't be safe with him ever. However, if he is a man who is broken and immature and does not know how to handle his emotions, and so he becomes threatened and ugly and all that kind of stuff, and has some conviction about that with guilty conscience, and he's willing to work on becoming the man he wants to be, then that's a whole different picture. So let him be his authentic self. And I think as women, as wives, it would be really important. So I'm going to give you a script. Let's say that your husband struggles with porn. Okay. Of course you don't like it. So you could say to him something like, I know you've struggled with porn our whole marriage. I can imagine that's a really hard struggle, because it temporarily does feel good to have some woman into you over the internet that isn't real, that you don't have to give anything back to, who's just all over you in your mind, that you are hot and you can still be who you are and she doesn't care, because that's how it is. If that's what's important to you and you want to live your life like that, with artificial relationships, with really no relationships, with really no intimacy, if that's what you want, who am I to tell you who to be? But I don't want to be married to someone like that. So now you're saying, this is who I am. And who are you? Instead of you saying, you need to put controls on the computer, you need to go to counseling, you need to stop doing. It's not your place to tell him who he should be. It's his place to decide who he wants to be. So if he's coming into marriage unhealthy and addicted to porn or alcohol or drugs, I understand it's a terrible thing to be addicted to those things. But is that something he wants to change or not? And if he doesn't, for whatever reason, you are not going to change him, right? You are not going to change him. Maybe jail will change him. Maybe hard consequences will change him, but words aren't going to change him if he doesn't want to change. So don't put that burden on yourself. Even Jesus said, this is what you need to do to have eternal life. And people said, no, thanks. The rich young ruler, this is what you need to do. And he said, no, I don't want to. And he let him be. He still loved him, but he let him be and he let him go. And so this is really important when someone has a personal problem that they don't want to change. And that problem is toxic to you and the family. Don't try to convince them to change if they don't want to change, because then they'll be inauthentic. And then they'll revert going back to their old ways as soon as you're off their back again. And then they lie and they sneak and you're already back in that same cycle. And we're going to talk about that all through the workshop. How do you know he really wants to change, or he's just trying to make you happy so that you let him come home? This is really critical for you to know. So this is really important for you to sign up for the workshop so that you can attend. So I want to get to some questions because my helper has to leave at 5:30, my time, 8:30 your time. So let me just see what questions we have up here so I can answer some before we go. All right, let me just get to here. This is always hard when I have to do all this on myself, but here. All right. How long do I continue to wait for him? Tamara, we're going to really talk about that very specifically in the workshop, so I hope you can attend. And I would really encourage you, ladies, to attend live. And let me tell you why. I will say things in the workshop that will not be publicly in a replay just because it's too long. And so we will shorten it for the replay and you won't get some of it. The second thing is that you will have an opportunity to get a whole lot of information from the chat as you ask questions and our coaches are answering them for you. Also, afterwards, I'll spend probably an hour and a half answering questions, which will not be in the replay. So you get a whole lot more value for showing up live. And if this is an important topic for you or someone you know that you love, I mean, this is invaluable. This is invaluable. I mean, if you consulted with me for an hour, it would be very expensive. And I'm doing all this just because I want to help the most women I can to really get clear so that when you do go for help or you do ask someone for help, you know clearly whose problem is whose and what needs to change first if this is really going to be put together in a good way. And how are you going to do that? All right. And so I really want to answer those questions. How long do you keep trying? And how will you know if things are going better? Are they really going better? Or is it just a temporary, sort of like the chemo patient who, has a revival, like, oh, I'm healed. And they're not really healed. They're just like 2 weeks before death, but they're feeling better, right? So are you really getting better? Is your marriage really getting better? Or is it just 2 weeks before it's going to die? And you need to know how to tell the difference. All right. And I will teach you some red flags, some real good signs that will help you know the difference. All right. My friend just texted me to tell me her husband and her agreed not to have children. All of a sudden, he says he wants kids, and if she doesn't, he will leave her. I don't know what to tell her. So I would say to her that this is a really important question, and I think it's legitimate for them to talk through. This would be, so I think she can try not to be defensive, like, hey, you promised me that we wouldn't do this. People do change their minds. People do have different feelings after they get married or after they get a little older. So I think it's worth having a conversation. The fact that he's threatened her, like, if you don't do what I want, I will leave you, is not a good sign. But it also might be, I would look at the pattern of the marriage. How has the marriage been over time? Has he been generally kind? Has there been a generally good relationship? Has there been mutuality and reciprocity, freedom? And is this just like a hot button issue for them right now? So I think it's important for them to say, this is a really important decision. And I think we both have to be in agreement. So let me do some soul searching to see about that. I want you to do some soul searching as to why you've changed your mind. Maybe we need a third party to have a good conversation about it, so we can really come to a decision about what we're going to do about having a child and what we're going to do about having a marriage, right? Because again, the hanging over you, if you don't do what I want, I'm doing this, is troublesome to me. But having, it's almost like having a child is sort of the assumed part of marriage. And so if that's really, really important to you and it's really not important to the other, maybe it would be better to say that out loud and move on than to stay married and be resentful and angry and take it out on the person the rest of the marriage because you wouldn't have a child with me. So I think those are all important topics to really be honest with yourself and with one another about. All right, here's another one. My husband is definitely a narcissist, but his biggest issue is neglect. He only provides financially, and that's it. He is completely emotionally neglectful and literally doesn't show love or attention in any way to me or the kids. We don't exist except to serve his needs. He's been like this our entire 28 marriage. Isn't this abuse too? Yep. So you function for him like this functions for me. All right. So I love my cell phone as long as it works and does everything I want it to do. So as long as it turns on, as long as it gives me its messages, as long as it goes to, Google Maps, as long as it gives me my email, as long as it texts like it's supposed to, I'm going to keep it. But if it starts giving me trouble, if it starts giving me grief, complaining, not working, not turning on, not doing what I want it to do, guess what? Guess where it's going? I'm discarding it and I'm going to get a different one. And that's what happens when you're typically married to a narcissistic person, is that you are there to serve them. And as long as you do that, they'll tolerate you. They'll even maybe like you and tell you that they love you, not because of you, but because of what you do for them. That's just the makeup of a narcissist. So you have to decide whether that's okay for you right now. And here's another distinction between my ministry and other ministries. It's always like, oh no, you have to leave him. Well, sometimes it's not wise for you to leave him right now for a number of reasons. It might be that you have tiny children who would be terrible in his care because he wouldn't take care of them. And you don't want to give him 50-50 custody because they're just objects as well. Or maybe you're not able to work right now. And so you'd be living in subsidized housing and you couldn't afford that, or you couldn't afford your medical insurance. And so he's providing for you financially. And so you have to decide whether or not you can live like this. If you have no expectations of him caring for you like you wished he would have as a normal husband, and you can find support and friends and care other places, and you can enjoy the benefits that he gives you, and he can enjoy the benefits that you give him as an object. He provides for you. That's somewhat of an object relationship. He's a paycheck, and you're a cook or a washer of his clothes or whatever you do for him. Sometimes that works as long as you're not in danger. You don't feel unsafe. You might feel unloved, and he might not care. And you have to decide whether that is something you want to do. But I think it's really, God has given us all a free will. And for us to, as Christians, or for us as people helpers, or for us as domestic violence advocates to say, oh no, you have to leave, is robbing a woman of her choice. And so you have some hard choices to make. You have some hard choices to make. You know the score. You know what he is going to give and what he's not going to give. So don't live in hopium, but decide what you need to do next, right? For you, what's in your best interest right now. Okay, I hope that helps. All right, let me get to the next question. All right, my husband has ADD, but he refuses to get help. He initially claimed it was because of his cancer, but his cancer is in remission and he still won't get help. I often feel ignored by him and get frustrated because of all of his attention problems. He always blames me for things, even if it's his fault. This has caused marital conflict. I've moved out, but our marriage makes it after 30 years. Any suggestions? I don't have a lot of hope that your marriage is going to improve after 30 years if he hasn't ever been willing to take any responsibility to fix anything. It's sort of like, let me give you an illustration. Let's say you live in a house, and it's a beautiful house when you first get married. It's a beautiful house. Everything works, everything's clean, but you never fix anything. And so now the roof leaks and the toilet's broken and the sink only has cold water and you have a hole in the floor and a hole in the wall and there's termites in the basement. And he's still at a place of, I'm not going to fix anything and I'm not going to look at anything. It's fine. I don't mind living here like this. All right. So for you to say, can I hope that our house will be fixed and we'll have a beautiful home again? Probably not. All right. So I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news, but healthy people live in truth and reality, not in hopium. I wish it was different. Of course you wish it were different. But unless you hire someone to come and clean your house and do all that, it's going to stay the same, and he's going to not let them in because he doesn't want to admit it's broken. Right. And so right now he's saying, I'm not going to do that. So I think you have to decide whether you want to continue living in a broken down house. And right now you're not. And so maybe it's safer for you just to be separate and say, I accept that you are unwilling to fix your problems. You're not willing to work on your ADD. You're not willing to fix what's broken. And I can't fix what's broken in you. I can only fix what's broken in me. I can support you, but I can't fix what's broken in you. I mean, even if you really care about someone, let's say you really care about a child who was wounded as a child. Maybe your husband abused one of your children, and you're seeing the effects of that on their adult life. They're depressed, they're angry all the time, they're drinking too much. How can you fix their problem? You can't. Even if you want to, you can't. They have to fix their problem. It's their problem now. It wasn't their fault, but it is their problem. Like someone broke my arm, right? It's not my fault, but it is my problem. I have a broken arm. What am I going to do to fix it if I want to have a healthy arm, right? And so this is the mistake of having a victim mindset. When you truly are a victim, someone runs you over with their car, someone's in a car accident, they have no car insurance, they mow you down, and you're in intensive care. It's not your fault, but you're in intensive care. Are you going to take care of you and get healed, right? Or are you just going to stay mad that they didn't help you and fix you and pay for you? They might not. They might have driven away, but you're still in intensive care and you need help. And if you're going to get healthy again and thrive, you got to do that. And so I would just encourage you to let him be who he wants to be. And if he wants to be lazy or irresponsible or in denial or immature, you can't motivate him to be who he should be. God can, and God's tried. And even God can't make someone change. God didn't make Judas change. God didn't make the Pharisees change. He told them about it, but they didn't want to change. Some people don't want to. The Bible tells us that really clearly. And so I just don't want you to waste a lot of energy trying to get someone to change who's clearly telling you, I don't want to change, because it's not going to work. Work on yourself. Work on yourself. All right, next question. And the webinar will give you some really, so our workshop is not just about marriage, like how long should you try and what are the signs, but I'm going to just tell you the bottom line is, so if he doesn't change, what do you need to do to get well? What do you need to do to get well? Is kind of the last 10 minutes of the webinar, right? Because we don't want to leave you in a like, oh my gosh, now what? Now what? Do your work. Do your work. If you're in intensive care because of your marriage, if your arm is broken because of your marriage, either literally or just metaphorically, if your heart is broken because of your marriage, you've got to do your work. Because otherwise you're going to stay in a depressed, depleted, broken way. And that's not God's will for you. It is God's will for you to rise up and be healthy and whole, even if your husband chooses not to. Don't stay broken because he stays broken. You don't have to do that. All right. We celebrated our 1-year anniversary this weekend, but still have not consummated our marriage. He won't hear a reason and says, it's because I'm disrespectful. Not true. All problems are because of me. So something's wrong. So he's come into marriage with a sexual issue. I'm not sure what it is. My guess is maybe he's not interested in women. So it's a cover for something else he's doing, but that's just a guess. I don't know that for sure. It's a story I'm telling myself based on what I've seen in the past. But I wonder for you, why are you putting up with this? Like, if he doesn't want to be married, he just wants to live with someone who pays the bills and cooks the food and cleans the house. He could pay for someone to do that, right? If he doesn't want to sleep with them and be together with them. So my question to you is, why are you letting yourself be lied to? And you're going to only get more and more depleted. So I would just really encourage you, dear, to come to the workshop and, kind of put your foot down, and either you get help for this or I'm done. But my guess is that the help that he would get for this isn't really going to solve the problem, because the problem is a deeper problem. It's not your problem. It's not your problem. Men who even don't like their wives still want to have sex with them, right? So it's not your problem. It's something going on with him. All right. And I would just encourage you to be compassionate about that. Something's going on with you. And I can't fix it. And you're not even being honest with yourself about it. And my guess is that it's that, but it might be something else. It might be something completely different. Like, men who've been used to watching porn a lot just can't function sexually anymore. That's how bad it gets when they're just used to masturbating all the time and doing that. they don't get aroused in the normal way anyway. So that may be part of his problem too. So I don't know what his problem is, but it's his problem. So how a personal problem becomes a marriage problem, here you go. That's it. But you can't fix this as a marriage. He's got to fix his problem if he wants to. And if he doesn't, where does that leave you? I would also contact a lawyer about a possible annulment. Since your marriage has not been consummated, that might be a legal route that you could go before too long. That might be more helpful for you. Okay. All right. Because then you wouldn't worry about having financial responsibility of splitting assets and all those kind of things the same, especially if you have more assets than he has. I was raised by abusive parents, and now that hubby is abusive, I see patterns return. How can I end the cycle? Yeah, I was raised by an abusive mom too. And so the person who has to end the cycle is you. By I won't let myself be abused anymore. So boundaries, and we'll talk about this a lot in the webinar workshop, boundaries are about you saying, I won't let myself be treated this way anymore versus you can't treat me this way. They can treat you however they choose to treat you, right? And as long as you let them, they will continue. So it's not about controlling them. It's about controlling you. Now, once you start to control you, they'll tell you you're trying to control them because you won't let them get away with what they got away with before without consequences. But boundaries are about how you let yourself be treated or not, right? Just like if you were a mom, you would have boundaries with your child and you would say, you are not allowed to hit mommy, right? You are not allowed to hit mommy. If you hit mommy, you're going to have a consequence, right? I'm not going to let myself be hit by a 2-year-old just because you're mad, right? And so the same thing with abusive people. I'm not going to allow myself to be talked to that way. So I'm leaving the room. I'm driving away. I'm going to the hotel for the night. I'm, calling the police, whatever I'm going to do to steward me because I'm not putting up with this anymore. So the abuse stops with you, not with the abuser. It stops with you. And as you put your boundary down, and I'm not advocating for this as an approach, but women who do not call the police, I advocate you to call the police. Women who are hit by their husbands and do not call the police are communicating to him that you're allowed to do that to me without any consequences. And that should never be. There should always be a consequence. And the consequences, I'm calling the police. This is against the law. You're not allowed to do this. I will not put up with this. And women who have done that the first time their husband has done that, he's rarely hit them again. Now he becomes much more verbally abusive. It's not like his abuse stops, but he doesn't do that anymore. But you've got to put your boundaries down. You've got to put your boundaries down. And we'll talk about that in the workshop a little bit. All right. My husband is an alcoholic. He thinks he has NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, but I'm not qualified. Oh, I think he has NPD, but I'm not qualified to diagnose him. He's verbally and emotionally abusive. He has been physically abusive in isolated instances. I have become bitter and have participated in reactive abuse. I've asked him to leave separate from us, and he refuses. He says he won't leave, only if I divorce him. He will not give me a separation. I am in a personal therapy working on my issues, but I am falling apart in this marriage. He refuses to accept any personal responsibility and will not seek any help. I am not sure of what to do. Well, step one is come to the workshop on Thursday, please. Please. Therapy is wonderful, but you will get a lot of helpful, specific. You'll get a workbook, 6 pages of what to do. All right. And you don't have to do it all, but take the steps. But this is what I want to show you right now. Okay. So we've talked about your problem, his problem, but we're going to talk about internal, external. Okay. And we've talked about this before. Okay. So this is what you're saying. So my husband is an alcoholic. That's an external problem. I think he has narcissistic personality disorders, but you're not qualified to just, he's verbally abusive. That's external. He's been physically abusive in isolated instances. So this is your external world. Okay. I asked him to leave here. He refuses. He won't leave. He will not give me a separation. I'm in personal therapy. This is your internal stuff, working on my issues, but I am falling apart. He refuses to take any personal responsibility and will not seek any help. I am not sure what to do. Okay. So I'm going to just make this really simple. It's not this simple, but I'm going to try to make it simple so that it's clear that what you're doing. You are compromising this, hoping this will change. You're saying, I need him to separate in order for me to be okay. I need him to stop drinking in order for me to be okay. I need him to love me in order for me to be okay. I need him to admit he's wrong in order for me to be okay. Okay. Now, I fell into that with my mom. Like, I need her to apologize in order for me to be okay. I need her to own her stuff in order for me to be okay. Guess what? She never did. She never did. Until on her deathbed, she did say she was sorry. But by law, I had given that up long ago. And so what the best advice I can give you, all of you, is as long as you are saying, I need something out here, whether it's I need my kids to always listen to me, I need my money to always be enough, I need my health to always be okay, I need my husband to always be honest and love me. In order for me to be okay, you are putting your entire well-being in someone else's hands or in life's hands. And God says that your well-being is dependent on me, right? We have a dear friend right now who's in hospice, and her external world is a mess. Her external world has been hurtful. She's dying of cancer, and she is the most calm, serene, trusting, centered, healthy woman that I've ever seen going through the valley of the shadow of death, because she doesn't need any of this in order for her to know who she is, to know where she's going, and to be at peace with where she's at. That's internal work. So I would just encourage you to come to the workshop and realize that you don't need, of course you would like him to change. Of course I would have liked my mother to own her stuff and apologize. It would have made it much easier for me to do my work, for sure. But what if that doesn't happen? What if that doesn't happen? Then you're held hostage by their immaturity, by their sinfulness, by their stupidity, by their stubbornness. Is that what you want? Of course not. So you have to begin to let go of needing him, anything from him, in order for you to be okay. Because once you don't need anything from him, in order for you to be okay, you don't need his money, you don't need his love, you don't need him to stop drinking, you take care of you, guess what? He loses his power over you. And that is amazing, right? You don't want any human being to have the power to destroy you, because Satan will use those people if you give it to him, right? And so you need to divorce not your husband necessarily, although you may, but you need to divorce your well-being on his benevolence. He's told you he's not going to be benevolent. He's told you he's not going to care for you. He's told you he's not going to care about what you think and feel. So don't keep depending on him to give you something he's not going to give you, because it continues to hurt you and destroy you inside. Make sense? I hope so. All right, let me move to the next question. How often do you see the spouse with a personal problem get the help and then go through with a deep, lasting change? I haven't seen it often, but I have seen it enough to know it can happen. And so let me just tell you a couple stories. So I was speaking at the Call to Peace retreat a couple years ago, and 2 years ago, I guess, a year ago. And I was walking around the lake there, and I got into the bookstore at the retreat center, and this big burly man comes up to me and he goes, "Are you Les?" I had a baseball cap on and, sweatpants. I didn't look like I normally do. I had my glasses on. I might have looked like I normally do if you knew me well, but I didn't think anybody recognized me. And he goes, "Are you Leslie Vernick?" And I said, "I don't know. It depends on who's asking." So because I never know, what are they going to do? Are they going to be mad at me, or are they going to thank me? And he goes, "I just want to thank you." And I said, "Oh, tell me more." So he goes, his wife was over there. He goes, "I caught my wife reading your book. And I was wondering, why is she reading this book on emotionally destructive marriages? I'm not a destructive man." So I ordered the book on Kindle and I'm reading it and I'm going, oh my gosh, I'm destructive. I never knew I was. And I called my counselor and I went in for help. And I got, and it's been like 10 years now and we're doing much better. And or not 10 years, but 5 years now. I'm doing so much better. And I just want you to know that. And so I looked at her and she goes, and then afterwards she came up to me, she goes, this is the funny story. She goes, "I didn't know I was in a destructive marriage. I bought the book from my girlfriend, but I was reading it first to see what it said." She goes, and he caught her reading it and he read it. And she didn't know she was in a destructive marriage until she read it herself too. But I have met men who've changed. I've worked with men who have changed. But I'll tell you what that looks like on Thursday. So you'll know whether your man is changing or not. All right. I'll show you what it looks like when you know they're changing. And you'll see what it looks like when you know they're not. They might be going through the motions, but they're not really changing. And you need to know what that looks like. So I haven't seen it a lot, but I have seen it. And let me say one more thing. I have never, in my 40 years of counseling, I have never seen an abuser change by a wife trying harder to be what the church tells her to be. Be more submissive, be more forgiving, be more forbearing. It's only when she gets strong enough to say, I love you, but I won't live like this anymore. So if you get help, fine. But if you don't, I'm not doing this. That's the only way any of them have ever changed, other than this man who read the book. But even then, he knew his wife was reading the book, so he was figuring she was going to do that, right? And so understand that by you getting stronger, that is your only chance of saying, hey, I'm going to grow and be all of God, who God called me to be. If you don't want to, that's on you. And that's between you and the Lord. But I'm not living like this anymore. It's unhealthy and it's dysfunctional and it's a bad example to the children. Not doing it. And then you do your work. And I'll tell you how to do that in the workshop. So please show up. All right. I think there's one more question, then we're going to go. The scariest thing for me is he says he's working on himself, but he has been emotionally abusive to some degree our whole marriage. Says I'm just as much to blame as he is. I don't want to have to evaluate his degree of change. How do I navigate that? Claire, I would highly encourage you to be at the workshop. I'll give you a roadmap. The roadmap that step 1, step 2, this is what you need to look for on the outside and the inside, on the outside and the inside, on the outside and the inside. If you don't see these things, no hope. Okay. It'll be very specific. All right. So please come to the workshop. If you don't know the URL for the workshop, I'm going to say it out loud in case you're listening on your phone and you're not actually on Facebook. It's www.leslievernick.com/join workshop. And if you join, then you decide I'm going to come to the noon time or I'm going to come to the 7:30 time. If you don't show up, you will get an abbreviated webinar, but you won't have the benefit of as much as you will if you show up live. So I'd really encourage you to show up live and pass this link on to someone else that you think might be beneficial, because we really want to minister to as many women as possible. But how do I know someone's really changing? I mean, this isn't just true of your kid. It might be, your husband. It might be true of your kid who's drug addicted, or a friend who's betrayed you, or, other people in your life. But we really want to know, what does change look like? And promises, even sincerely uttered, I will change, I'll go to counseling, doesn't necessarily really lead to change. And they might be whitewashed lies, or they might be sincere, but it still doesn't lead to change. So we may truly believe our husband is sorry this time and wants to change, and he may truly be sorry and want to change, but there's still a long road from wanting to be different to actually learning to be different and being different, right? There's a long road of change that has to happen. And if they're not willing to walk that long road and do the work to change, just think about yourself, how hard it is to change anything, whether it's, I need to stop watching so much TV, or I need to exercise more. Change is hard, right? And even if you're committed, how many of us stay our New Year's resolutions and we're committed December 31st, and then around January 20th, we're like, I'm not going to do that anymore, right? And so to stay committed over the long haul takes something internal. And this we'll talk about in the workshop. What are you looking for? What are you looking for to be that motivator that's going to keep him going when it's hard, and keep you going when it's hard, because change is hard. All right. Would you recommend the workshop even though my husband is no longer living in my house? I am struggling with my role in all of this. Yes, I would. I would recommend the workshop, because even though he's no longer living here, you still have your work to do, because you have patterns too. You have unhealthy or dysfunctional or immature patterns too. They might be, I paid back evil for evil, or I had an affair because he had an affair, or I was reactively abusive back to him, or I just shut down, I froze, I placated, I pretended, I denied, I was hopium, I was lying to my kids, and everything's fine, but nothing was fine, right? So you could be unhealthy in a number of different ways. It doesn't just have to be an aggressive unhealthiness. It can be a very passive unhealthiness that you put up with this way too long. Why? And I had one woman who, started to take action because, I'm afraid God's going to be mad at me. So this whole spiritual piece for Christian women is really important. Is God mad at you when you say, no more, I'm not putting up with this? Or is he saying, good for you, it's time to show your husband what real love looks like? That love doesn't indulge and enable sin to flourish. That's not what love does. We totally get it with our kids. We wouldn't give our kids candy for dinner every night, or let them stay up all night and not go to school just because they wanted to, right? We wouldn't do that. Now, we're parents and we have some control over that. But if our husband is wanting to buy toys and eat candy and play all the time like a 14-year-old, play video games or watch porn, that's not God's will for him. And we can't make him do God's will, but we certainly don't want to enable him by covering up for his mistakes and, filling in all the missing pieces that he's not doing so that he can continue to be childlike in the marriage or abusive in the marriage just to stay married? Does that really honor God? And that's what we're going to talk about on Thursday. All right. So I don't see any other questions in the feed. I know that Kelly, who was helping me, had to leave. So there may not be. So let me just, self-love is the key. Yeah. Self-love is the key. But what is self-love biblically? Because sometimes we feel selfish and guilty and like, oh, I don't know if I should love myself. And it doesn't mean getting a manicure every week. It means caring about yourself and stewarding yourself as a precious child of God, just like you would steward your child as a precious child of God. Steward yourself. You are worth something to God, and he wants you to care for yourself and your well-being. All right. Yeah. All right. So good. Can't think about, let's see. Cannot think about doing this for the next whatever time I have. Yeah. All right. What is the name of your book? My book is on Amazon. There's a number of them. So the emotionally destructive marriage is one, the emotionally destructive relationship. If this isn't a marriage relationship that's toxic, that's where I wrote about my relationship with my mother quite a bit. Another book that I've had out there for quite a long time is How to Act Right When Your Spouse Acts Wrong, to teach you to understand that when they act wrong and you act wrong back, it just makes it worse. So how do you act right, whatever right looks like? How do I be the right kind of helpmate when he acts wrong? It might not be by forbearance. It might be by confrontation and holding his feet to the fire. And that may be the absolute right thing to do, even though that may not be what your pastor tells you to do. And so it's really important for us as Christian women. I mean, it's a whole different topic, and I'm not going to go into this, but I think as Christian women, we've defaulted our thinking to the men in our lives. Like biblically, we've not done our own work. We've not seen what God's word says for ourselves. We've just trusted that what our Christian counselor says or what our pastor says or what Leslie Barnick says is right. Please read your Bible. See what God says. I'll show you where the Bible passages are in the workshop, but read it for yourself. Don't take any one person's word on it. That's like letting yourself be led by a cult leader. So do your own work. Be suspicious about what someone says, because there's a very tricky kind of abuse called spiritual abuse that can make you feel guilty and bad because I tell you that this is what God says when that's not what God meant at all. We can twist even God's words. Satan twisted the word of God to try to trick Jesus into, making stones into bread and jumping off the temple. And Jesus said, get away from me, Satan. I'm not falling for your lies. And Satan used the scriptures. So be careful that we're not thinking for ourselves, and that you take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. You are transformed by the renewing of your mind by God's word. Guard your heart above all else. It is the wellspring of life. Who does that work for you but you? That's self-love. That's the self-love that God's talking about. Just like you would wash your armpits and take a shower and, brush your teeth every day because you care about yourself. Why aren't you stewarding your inner life and your thought life, so that you're not beaten down or so easily manipulated by smooth talking words or ugly words by another person? They're just a human being, just like you. They've got no special status. And yet we put such power in people's words. And the Bible tells us that life and death is the power of the tongue. So I would just encourage you to check out what I say with God's word. Think about things for yourself. Is this who God is? Is this how he treats women? Is this he devalues women because men do? No, not my Bible. Read through the New Testament. Jesus didn't devalue women. He honored them, even when they weren't honored in the culture. So understand that God cares about you, and he cares about what's happening to you. He cares about your husband too. But he doesn't want him to stay sick and immature any more than you do. But he has a choice, just like you have a choice. So I hope you make a good next right choice and come to our workshop on Thursday. I think it can be game-changing for you and life-giving for you if you actually show up, pay attention, stay present, and learn. And then check out everything I say with what God's word says, so that you can be confident that what I'm saying is what God has to say to you. All right? All right, take care. We'll see you Thursday. All right, God bless. Bye-bye.